Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to another critique of the week. So glad you could join me. Let's see, who do we have here today? We got Cindy Guntherman, Jerry Stephenson, Dr. Q's here, Brian O'Sullivan, Lynn Schilling, Petty Arbor's here, B, hello B, Dr. Q is here, Jamie Thomas, Nancy Sabanik, Hemet Mullock, D. Coleman, Mark Grenier, Dick Westheimer's here, Ali Rowland, Tara Meslick McMahon, Winston Munn, Steve Horal is here, Chelsea McClellan, Jerry Stephenson, Deb T's here. All right. Let's see over. Oh, Emily Arnold Fernandez, Sharon Ferrante, James Spencer. Yeah, sorry. Apparently, I had the wrong time. It is confusing doing the time zones because a lot of these platforms don't list the time, and sometimes they recognize that you're in a different time zone, and sometimes they don't. And it doesn't say. Facebook just fixed this actually not too long ago. They started adding the actual time zone in when you're making an event page, but YouTube still doesn't. So you kind of have to guess what time zone they think you're in. And sometimes I guess wrong, and I mean to check back, but I forget that too. Anyway, sorry if the time was off. So right now it says, yeah. Let me see if I can edit on the fly. It says not that it actually matters because we're streaming live. Anyway, yeah, I can't change it, but yeah, that's the problem, and it happens a bunch. So if I'll tell you if we're not doing the critique of the week at a regular time, I will let you know. But anyway, this is a critique of the week right now, and we're gonna have a lot of fun looking at some poems. As always, the whole point is to give that workshop experience, which Katie Dozier is getting right now at the Pacific MFA program. But we get to have that right here for free, and it's always, as Manny says, it's always now, and it is a highlight of my week. I really enjoy doing these. I'm glad you do too, since you're here. You must. Let me and so as always, what we're going to do is go through as many poems as possible. We're going to start with a poet who is here. That's going to be my goal. Like if you're here, if I see your name and I saw you on the list, I'm going to try. We had a Winston Munn had a poem. We're going to do that next week, I think. We're going to start with Steve Horal. And he's got a couple poems, and he's in the crowd right now. And so go through. We'll look at these poems. We'll say what works, what doesn't. We'll talk about them, how they can be improved, what's going on there, and leave as many comments as you can. I'll pass them along. But of course, people are watching and can look at the comments too in the chat windows. If you're having your poem critiqued, we'll let you know. If you'd like to submit your poems for a workshop, all you gotta do is go to rattle.com/critique. And then you'll find the link there to submit one or two poems. We'll take a look at them in the order they were received. Unless you're a regular participant, then we'll boost you up and we'll do it sooner. So let's see. Let's go first to Steve Horal. And did he have any general questions? So Steve says, took a long time deciding which two poems to send in for critique. I have quite a few in need. The American bullfrog is not native to Vancouver Island and wasn't in this area when I first moved here. Note the cottontail rabbit, also not native, and I have watched its relentless movement from the South Island. However, we have one of the highest concentrations of cougars, but seldom see one. Yeah, if you see one, you've probably been seen by one like 100 times. I often have problems with titles. I've included two possible titles for each poem, and we appreciate feedback. So titles is one thing we'll talk about too. Let's take a look at what we've got. And we do like to do people who participate because you get to be rewarded by actually participating by having your poems read a little faster. And so this was only sent a couple weeks ago by Steve. And like I said, we'll do Winston's next week. We're going to do a poetry space on after poems. And his is actually an after poem. And so that'd be fun to do. All right. So here we go. This is Clarity or How to Get There. And that's one of the fun things. One of my favorite novelists is Kurt Vonnegut. And Kurt often will have alternate titles in his books, like what is it, Breakfast of Champions or Hello Good or Goodbye Blue Monday? Is that what it's called? But he's got several of his novels or have two titles, and it's kind of fun. And so maybe you could even think of having two titles as a possibility. But here's what he sent. This is Clarity or How to Get Here, How to Get There. Here we go. In the farm dugout, the American bullfrogs, like most of us, not native here, muscle their way in, leaving strands of eggs slung about. The ravens lift dead rats off the tops of the fence posts. My offerings to their young broods, soon to be teenagers, when they pull all my plant tags out. So much for control. At night the owls hoot fair warnings to the rabbits and all. I hoot an answer. But as with most things, I don't know the language. I gather words together for a poem, but they wander off, slightly drunk, muttering at their shoelaces. Too often I hear the wind pushing sleep away. Sometimes it's just the deer. Yesterday a young doe sniffed the entire shaft of narcissus, paused at the flower, then left it unscathed. Now I watch her eating tulip leaves and don't even rise. That's the last poem. Yeah. Oh, clarity. Tell me where you live and how to get there. Okay, the last 2 lines are on the next page. Okay, so clarity or how to get there. Now, one of the things, yeah, Sharon Freddy says I like them together. The two titles. Hammett says slightly drunk. Yeah, that was a nice line. There's some nice lines. There's a nice setup in this poem. So in the farm dugout, the American bullfrogs, like most of us, not native here, muscle their way in. I like muscle their way in too, leaving strands of eggs slung about. I love the strands of eggs slung about too. It's really nice descriptions of what we're seeing. And so we enter the poem in a really nice way. The thing about the title, I was going to say, is that we sort of repeat the title at the end. And that's something that I really recommend avoiding. So we have clarity, tell me where you live and how to get there. And then the title is clarity or how to get there. And the thing about the thing that makes, I think, the impulse to have the last word or the last line be the title is that's something that ends up having a surprising resonance. And then so we're sort of feeling like we want to have that repeated and that experience repeated. And then we put in the title because that's like the heart of the poem. But the problem is that when you do that, it makes that have a lot, it makes it less strong when you get to that. If we read clarity or how to get there, and then it weakens that line when we get to the actual line, because we've already heard it. Like those synapses are already like ready to fire. They're sort of rebounding from their electrical state. So it's not, we're not as struck by it as we would otherwise. Yeah. Dick Westheimer says, I would suggest a title that I would suggest neither title in that it is really telling, but be what you think the poem is about, rather than giving a feeling about what the poem is doing. Yeah, so we want to, if possible, and I think we learn a lot in this from the Haibin. That book we talk about a lot, the Haibin, a Writer's Guide. We learn, having a leap from the title to the text where it adds something to the poem is really worth doing. And so I would suggest trying to think of something, like try to read the poem, and then like where does your mind wander? Like how can you take some kind of leap that you're surprised by? And I think that might, have something that's like tangentially related, but not quite. And I think that's where the strongest titles often come from. So don't try to be as precise with it as far as like this is what the poem is about, because that's going to take away some of the power of the poem, and we don't want to do that. So I don't know. We'll think of more titles as we go along. But anyway, so I really love the first stanza because it really sets the scene. We know where we are. We get a sense of the voice of the speaker, and so we're ready to ride along with the poem. The ravens lift dead rats off the tops of the fence posts, my offerings to their young broods, soon to be teenagers. When they pull all my plant tags out, so much for control. I think the format has no punctuation. Well, it has capital letters, which is interesting to start to denote the beginning of titles, or beginning of sentences, I should say. But then no period to end the sentence and no punctuation in between. And in here, I think it's one of those things you can do it like that. W.S. Merwin does that on a whole series of poems for years worth of books. But you have to be careful not letting it trip up. And I think it works well in the first stanza. But in the second stanza, I tripped a little bit over soon to be teenagers when they pull all my plant tags out, so much for control. Like we don't really know how to juggle through that. And so I think we would just see, I think if you don't have punctuation, you have a real reason for not using punctuation. Yeah, Manny says I'm slightly confused by the second sentence, and part of it is the lack of punctuation, I think. I would just add it back in. If we want to do it, we just have to be careful where the line break should always sort of stand in for a punctuation piece, kind of, if you're not going to use punctuation normally, like normal punctuation. And that makes the reading experience better. So anyway, so for the second stanza, which Manny's slightly confused by, and it's that so much for control is a real interjection that I'm not sure fits. We're setting up the ravens lift dead rats off the top of the fence posts, my offering to their young brood, soon to be teenagers, when they pull all my plant tags out. So much for control. with because it runs on, it's hard to like place the thing together. Yeah. And yeah, as Nancy Towns says, there are several references about not really being in control. Is that a sub-theme? Should more be made of it? Yeah. And Emily Arnold Fernandez says, the narrator doesn't quite seem to get the clarity. Most of the poem is about not having clarity. Yeah. Deb T says, I'm not a fan of so much for control. And yeah, so this is an aside, and it comes in a way that doesn't really follow the syntax of the rest of the sentence. So we get a little bit, I don't know. And then also, I'm not really sure I follow, I get soon to be teenagers, they're being left the rats. When they pull all my plant tags out, I don't really know what the plant tags are referring to. Somebody also didn't understand what a farm dugout is. I assume it's kind of like a lean-to, because in baseball you have dugouts, which is like where the bench where you sit, and it's sort of covered with a roof and a side maybe, or maybe three sides, but open otherwise. I imagine it's like that and full of tools. But I haven't seen it phrased that way before. I didn't really have a problem with that though, because I could really easily imagine it. But maybe if you have trouble with that, that's a thing. But but I'm not understanding about pulling all my plant tags out. So yeah. Maybe it's a Canadianism, I think. All right, yeah. Well, I think it makes sense to me. Anyway, so the so much for control. I'm not sure what the plant tags are, and then how does control relate to the leaving the dead rats out? It seems like a strange disconnect. Anyway, we'll continue. At night the owls hoot, fair warnings to the rabbits and all. I hoot and answer, and I like the I hoot and answer. There's a nice shift to the personal there. But as with most things, I don't know the language. I like that too. I like this section. Gather words together for a poem, but they wander off slightly drunk, muttering at their shoelaces. I like that too. So once we get into this personal here, I like it. Too often I hear the wind pushing sleep away. Sometimes it's just the deer. Yesterday, and see, this is another spot where the punctuation would be helpful, because we really don't want to read it that fast. It's like it's a thought, sort of a reverie type moment where you're sort of daydreaming. And I think there would be like a pause between that, but I didn't read it that way because there's no punctuation and just a line break. So it seems like it's going to be read quickly through. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, then the story's going to turn a little bit. Yesterday, a young doe sniffed the entire shaft of a narcissus, paused at the flower, then left it unscathed. Now I watch her eating tulip leaves and don't even rise. Clarity, tell me where you live and how to get there. And so we get the clarity in, which seems, yeah. I mean, it comes through with the not knowing what to write about, that aspect of it, and then not knowing the language, which we talked about before. But it feels sort of forced in there. I don't think it's really the poem's found what it's about. So we set up, this scene. But I'm not really sure how the American bullfrog's invasion as a non-native species relate to the clarity and how to get clarity, and the rats too. If maybe instead of like so much for control, we were talking about their clarity and purpose as like lower level biological actors, where they have certain requirements to eat. And the owl too, and maybe we could play with that. But it feels like a I don't know, like it's not really fleshed out. Yeah, Hemant says it feels more on the theme of migration and multiculturalism, and yeah, and that's true, because we talk about how the Canadian, being there. I can't remember where it is. But somewhere there was a sense of everybody not being native. Oh, yeah. Like most of us, not native here at the very top. So I don't know. So this sort of it feels like there's some artificial profundity added to the poem to make it make sense, instead of finding out what it was really about. Like, what is it about the bullfrogs that draw you into writing this poem? And how that triggered some kind of deeper thought that you hadn't articulated yet. And I don't think clarity is the thing, and that's my impression of it. And I don't know what other people feel. I like the descriptions of it. I like what it's playing with, but I don't think it's found what it really wanted to play with. Okay. And I think, I think it kind of got to the point where I was describing, as the writer, I was describing things and then felt like I would want to be done with the poem, and so added this at the end, Brian O'Sullivan suggests maybe invasion or migration could be the title. I think the poem is just, half finished. I don't think it's found itself yet. And so for that reason, I think it's hard to even say what the title should be. So this is something I play a little more with, this pondering why the poem was pushed to be created, and what is it about the frogs that made you want to write about them? Because I don't know, the leap to clarity just isn't clear. No pun intended. But as Nancy Tell says, yeah, I do like the descriptions very much. And if it is, so as Winston Munn says, to me the control is control of the ravens or nature. I think it could be fleshed out and played with more, but it's really not, So I don't know. It's one of those poems where I'm, as people are saying, the imagery is great. I feel like I'm connected to the narrator. I'm enjoying the story, waiting to figure out what it's really about, or what it does, what it adds to what we think. PMB says maybe think of an invasive species. I think if we go to if the migration is more the issue, and we're talking about where we belong and what being a steward of the land is, and how that taking away from nature but adding to it at the same time, we're playing with that. And then the migratory aspect of like humanity, if we're pushing that farther, then it would be, we could go in that direction. But if we, I don't know. Yeah, as David Bose says, I think there's a couple different poems here, and I think that's the issue. So figuring out what the poem is what we need to do with this, and we just haven't yet. So doing that, playing with this more, just letting it sort of fish around in your subconscious and see what you pull up as you work on thinking about this more. That's what I would do, and then and I would though go back to using punctuation, because punctuation exists for a reason. And I think that it detracts in this poem too. There's some nice lines. Yeah. Let me look at what the note was really quick again about this poem, just in case I forgot something. Let's see. So the American bullfrog is not native to Vancouver Island and wasn't in this area when I first moved here. Yeah, I mean, that does seem rich with metaphor and possibility. I think it's just not capitalized on. Note 2, the cottontail rabbit is also not native, and I have watched its relentless movement from the South Island. However, we have one of the highest concentrations of cougars, but seldom see one. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so that is the first poem we're looking at, and that's my thoughts about that. Oops. Forgot to turn the music off. Okay. So let's look at the other one. This is Erosion or A Common Story. Here we go. Erosion or A Common Story. The burst of love, the joy of mornings together, familiarity of flesh, her hair falling over his chest. The times they drove to the coast, clutching the waves, binding together, the salt lick of bodies, laughing and dreaming of always. But somehow the daily erosion set in. He found despite in others, she found less and less. She found respite in others, she found less and less. The mountain of love eroded into a delta of grief, spreading out from her feet. But every morning she tries to extract a shard of joy from the return of the sun, from bird song, a new bird at the feeder. She tries and tries. So I like the movement in this to, that bird at the feeder and then trying and trying to find a new bird. I like that. I think that's the perfect amount of ambiguity and letting the reader come to their own conclusion about it. Like I think, and letting the image speak to itself. I think it's a great example of that. So I like the ending aspect of it. Again, there are some times where you didn't get the right, sort of use of silence out of not having punctuation. So again, I would recommend adding punctuation back into the poems. But let's look at it more closely. And then Erosion or A Common Story. And like we talked about before, I think these are sort of summarizing type titles, which are more like using the title as a label. I think A Common Story is a little better than Erosion as the title, because it makes it adds to this like, oh, I mean this to be expanding outward, so it does something productive, but it's sort of not that much. And then Erosion is sort of just a label of what you're describing, and so that really adds nothing to the poem. And so what you want to do is have some kind of poem that takes you to the next level. The best experience is to read a poem that you sort of, the title was interesting. I think this is like the ideal scenario for when you're reading a title and then the poem. You read the title, it's intriguing, it makes you want to read. Then you read the poem and you forget about the title. Then you get to the end and you've had some journey, because a poem is a magic spell that you're casting to transform in some way our emotional or psychological state. So you have this transformative experience, you read the end, and then you look back up the title and you say, oh, that's why that was the title. And it kind of clicks together and makes sense. And it adds something even more, an extra level. After you've had that revelation, that discovery or whatever that comes with the poem, then you get some little extra on top of it. And I think that's the kind of thing that you want to strive for if you can. And so, I don't know. So think about something at a tangent, at an angle that's a little more surprising for the title, and you'll get a lot more out of it. I think that's the best way to think about titles. There's also the suggestion from Kim Stafford to write several titles. I can't even remember what they were. Was it just a short one, a long one, and a weird one? Is that what he said? And then usually the weird one or the long one is the one that he picks. Yeah. Sharon Friday says, if he wants no punctuation, shorten the lines so it works. Yeah. A lot of times, having shorter lines and more variable but short lines helps the punctuation become, or the line break become punctuation. Yeah. Hey, Jamie Thomas puts it this way: I love adding Easter eggs in the title, and I just love discovering them. Yeah, I think that's a great way to think of it. And you don't have to do that with a title. Of course, there's a lot of different ways to do it. But I think that's the one that's like the most productive. And that's why we love the Hyben and the talk about the Hyben issue, is because really explicitly in the Hyben form, those editors of the Hyben, Roberta Beery and Lou Watts and Rich Humans are talking about how important it is to have that leap. Like there's a leap between the haiku and the prose part of the Hyben, having a leap from the title and the other two really heightens the quality of the poem. And so thinking about a title that way is the best way to think about it. Although, as long as the title's providing some function, it can be describing, helping us access the poem that doesn't have all the details. Last week I think we talked about sometimes there was some scientific jargon. Was it the AMOC, or I can't remember. Oh no, it was the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is a mouthful to say, and you put that in the title, then it's not stuck in the poem. There's a lot of uses for a poem, or for a title in a poem, but I think the best one is to have a leap. Okay, another thing I wanted to point out in this, I think we had a really great opportunity to extend a metaphor here, and then we sort of didn't extend it as far as it could go. So let's read the poem from the top. Erosion, or a common story. The burst of love, the joy of mornings together, familiarity of flesh, her hair falling over his chest, the times they drove to the coast. So these details, I think this is a bit of a spinning the wheels kind of description. There's nothing that stands out in a way that other details do in the poem. So maybe I'd try to make these a little more interesting. But we can continue. The times they drove to the coast, clutching the waves, binding together the salt lick of bodies. The salt lick of bodies is nice. Laughing and dreaming of always. But somehow the daily erosion set in. He found respite in others. She found less and less. Do you see how we have somehow the daily erosion set in? And then we go to an abstraction instead of going more concrete. And there's a real opportunity here to expand on this, go into detail about what the erosion is like. Like start imagining, fire up that imagination, use imagery there, and dig into that metaphor. So describe the erosion taking place. And, we saw from the last poem that Steve has a lot of farm experience and a lot of gardening experience. And what does erosion look like there? How can we dig in? Like, what can we take from our life that we know about and we've seen and can imagine to push the metaphors farther? If we want to go, because we went to the coast, we could talk about coastal erosion instead. And the way that, that the tide moving undercuts the sand and the houses start crumbling into the sea and blah, blah, blah. Like you can imagine all these like details, that you can pull in, and then that gives you sort of fuel for your creativity. You sort of like you gather up all the things that this metaphor provides, all the images and facts, and then that becomes like fuel for pushing the poem farther into the metaphor that you're sort of seeking. I think so. So I think there's a missed opportunity by moving on so fast into abstraction here. The daily erosion set in. He found respite in others. She found less and less. So make this erosion metaphor. The mountain of love eroded into a delta of grief. And so this is getting at it. We delayed it, and we should have gone concrete there. And then we sort of touched on doing it, saying a mountain of love eroded into a delta of grief. But we could go so much farther in how mountains erode down and where the rocks end up and how they're like underwater canyons, that they're carved by the detritus of the surface. There's all sorts of stuff you can go. And so go somewhere and make that interesting. Anyway, but every morning she tries to extract a shard of joy from the return of the sun. And I do like this at the end, the attempt. Courtney says, sadly, this is probably a common story, but the poem itself is filled with unique personal detail, and I'm on the fence about whether common story undermines the sad tone or highlights it. Deb T says maybe both. I think that having it a common story, and then if we heightened up and had more specific details about the individual nuances of that's the kind of leap we're talking about with making the title expand the poem a little bit. So if it's called The Common Story, and then we get this very specific, idiosyncratic, nuanced experience of this sort of loss, the erosion of love, and then we look back up and say The Common Story, and then we say, oh, all these things, even though all the details are different, it's common across lifetimes. It's just a human experience. And so that's sort of an additional commentary on the poem. That's the exact kind of thing I was talking about. So I think that works. Yeah. Yeah, Rosenart is very much like the last stanza with the birds, and I do too. I think it's the best part of the poem. All right, so we've done a good amount. So thanks for sharing these, Steve. And as always, if you're here and you want to share poems, we'll get to you right away, so you won't have to wait. So put your poems into the queue. Go to Horal.com/critique, and we'll get to you as soon as we can. We'll get to Winston next week. Talking about that after poem should be fun too. So now let's take a look at some oldest poems in the queue. And the other place that I sort of recruit from, I've started back. I stopped doing this for a while, but when I send sort of the standard form rejection letter now, or decline, to say it more kindly, I add a PS now. And I used to have this years ago, and then we got such a big backlog I stopped. But I say if you want some individual feedback, submit it here. Resubmit a poem or two to Critique of the Week. And so we'll have more and more people doing that because I put it back. And then once we get over like 150 and it's too long, then I'll probably stop saying that again. But these are people who, are not participating like we are and should be. Because everybody here just gets so good compared to the typical, submissions and poets that you hear at an open mic or in the submissions, because the more we work like this, the better we all get. And it's a really great thing. So anyway, let's go back in time. The oldest submission in the queue is from September 8th. The poet is Aisha Rzan Baja from Karachi, which is in Pakistan, yeah. So no general questions. Let's take a look at the poem. I think there's only one. Yeah, and the font's very small. I went to zoom in to fit. Let's see if this works. Okay. Yeah. Mary Kidding says, yeah, it's a good time to say, if you're enjoying this and you like the Critique of the Week, and I don't know why you wouldn't, because it's the best and easiest workshop experience to get all around, do click the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed here. Clicking likes encourages more people to participate. And then we get better poetry and less weak poetry that doesn't move us. We get more poetry that's more interesting, and everybody wins. So do click the like button if you haven't yet. So this is the first poem. Bellatrix lives on my rooftop. It's kind of hard to fit it all in the way it's formatted, but that's okay. Bellatrix who lives on my rooftop. I don't know what a Bellatrix is. That's a word. Let's see. Bellatrix is a Latin word that means female warrior. There's also the name of a bright star in the constellation Orion. Okay. Yeah, that's the only thing I knew. I recognized Bellatrix from the star, but I didn't know it was a female warrior. Okay. So that's the detail about that. Let's take a look at the poem. And I'll zoom in even more too. Okay. A Bellatrix who lives on my roof. A doorway mewling. In dismay, I still see her, laid in a dress as red as her blood, rested as if the sculpture was carefully placed. In the nights of frigid triumph, she still saunters on that balcony, as if she has returned from the bright Bellatrix. Pulling down the curtain of mortification, her open call to game of names and shame, none was worthy, none was an Orion. So the men stood stunned in their annihilation. Alas, more quiet as morning death on this execution. In summer mornings I see her sitting by the window on the rooftop, and for sure no lady of shallot is she, for she gazes long through all this razzmatazz, with a handful of grapes vengeful wrath, and behind those eyes of a weeping maiden, the devil-may-care soul is all I read. Oh, how much I yearn to reach that Elysium, to cry out to her and put a stop to the memory of a woman on my rooftop. Interesting. So, so this is a Bellatrix who lives on my rooftop. And so Dempsey says I'm already lost, and I'm a little lost at who and I think this is one of those places, and man, that sun is like right in the crack of my blinds that I closed during the show. It's one of the places where I'm not sure how to situate what the actual Bellatrix is. Is it a cat? The mewling, do anything else mewl besides a cat? Yeah. It's like a whimper. A baby boy softly mews. Okay, so I guess it doesn't necessarily be a cat. I always think of it. I think the only time I see it is a cat mewling. And so the whole time I was wondering like who this is. A doorway away, mewling in dismay, I see her laid in a dress as red as her blood. So is that a real woman in a dress? I mean, I guess so. But what is the... I don't know. It feels... I don't know. There's a lack of clarity in like who she actually is, you know? Yeah. B says maybe the Bellatrix changes throughout the poem. Yeah. That could be. I don't know. So the whole time I'm trying to piece together what's actually going on in the poem, and I sort of distracted from paying attention to the poem itself and the emotional content and the weight of the thing, you know? And so it helps. Yeah. So it helps to get a little more clarity at the top of who she is, you know, and if, you know, so who is the question? And a more description as, yeah. Nancy Sabanek says, seems to be a memory or a ghost. Yeah. And David Booth says, I got confused when she went from laid in a dress to sauntering on her balcony. Writer Jan F. says, mewling and puking was used to describe babies in Dylan Thomas's Under Milkwood. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, and Wayne the Poet is a woman who he metaphorically thinks of as a warrior. Yeah. Okay, well, let's read the poem again and talk about it in more depth. Here. Doorway, mewling in dismay, I still see her, laid in a dress as red as her blood, rested as if the sculpture was carefully placed. So I guess, you know, I'm wondering, so I think first time I think it's a cat, then I know it's a woman, and then I'm like, what is this sculpture? And so the whole time I'm just kind of trying to figure out like literally what's going on, and it becomes difficult. In the nights of frigid triumph, she still saunters on the balcony, as if she was returned from the bright Bellatrix, pulling down the curtain of mortification, her open call to game of names and shame. Yeah, Mark says lots of exotic vocabulary here, but it almost seems like an exercise where certain words were supposed to be used, but the poem needs a clear emotional center. That's a great way to put it, carried out throughout. Yeah, it's lacking an emotional center, and I'm looking for the emotional center the whole time. Yeah, Ali Warren says, I think there are lots of allusions to famous poems here, and maybe too many. Yeah, I'm not a big fan, and some of it's personal preference, but you don't see many poems with that are based on Greek or mythological references, and I don't find that interesting. I find it hard to keep track of, and there's like a high admission price because you need to know to understand. And I think if the poems can have that stuff and like work still, and it adds a layer maybe of illusion and adding to the mythology, but I tend to find them boring, and so I prefer to avoid that kind of thing. And, the poems resting on illusion don't have the immediacy and the power of poems that don't rest on illusion, and so I tend to avoid that. Yeah, it's interesting. A bunch of people have mentioned like AI vibes, and I don't think that's the case. Reading submissions, this is the kind of stuff that's submitted all the time, for years before AI was a thing. Yeah, but it has a stilted quality, and I think a lot of that comes from, I think, too, having people who speak multiple languages, thinking in one language and translating itself into another language, and also trying to heighten the language into poetry. I think that happens a lot. And so, one of the things we often talk about is having that sense of a voice of somebody speaking who would say this in an authentic way, and having that voice be consistent. And that means having a consistent sense of diction and register and the tone of voice that you're using. That's something I think that what Mark is pointing out, these words that feel like they're sort of inkhorn words is the expression. I think that was, who invented that? What was that guy that did the Samuel Johnson? Who did all the dictionary? Man, it's been a long time since I did literary history stuff. But is that who it is? Yeah. But anyway, inkhorn was those unnecessary wastes of the ink, and there's some of those kind of shoehorned in here, and having it feel consistent, like we're always using the same language all the time. If you want to have heightened words, more Latinate long words and complicated words and obscure words. Like Geoffrey Hill is a poet who fills his poems with that kind of thing. And it's fine as long as it's consistent and you feel like it's one voice. But when it moves back and forth in register and diction in certain word usage, it doesn't feel like you're being enraptured by having this voice, which is a poem, enter your body, which is what a poem really does. So anyway, so keep consistent with the voice. I don't know, and I don't really know how to comment on all the illusions, because I just don't. It's hard to keep track for me. It's not something I ever find interesting personally. Yeah. Okay, well, anyway, let's keep reading, because I got distracted a little bit. Pulling down the curtain of mortification. That's the thing. Pulling down the curtain of mortification and then annihilation. Those things are like big, chunky words that don't really fit with the rest of the language in the poem. None was worthy. None was an Orion. So the men stood stunned in their annihilation. Alas, more quiet is mourning death on this execution. In summer mornings I see her sitting by the window on the rooftop, and for sure no lady of Shalott is she. See, I don't know who the lady of Shalott is. She, and then again, not again, but the capitalized letter here, and I think that might just be a typo, but I'm not sure why it's capitalized. For she gazes long through all this razzmatazz. And again, razzmatazz doesn't feel like a word that fits with what this speaker otherwise would say. Yeah. With a handful of grapes, vengeful wrath, and behind those eyes of a weeping maiden. And at this point in the poem, I'm still trying to figure out who this character actually is. And so because I'm trying to piece that together and still don't really get a clear glimpse, I can't get to that level of being emotionally and intellectually connected to the storytelling. So clarity here is just the key to adding more to the poem. Letting us know actually like what's going on. Okay. And behind those eyes of a weeping maiden, the devil may care soul is all I read. I'm not sure whose soul that is or what I'm looking at. I'm just lost. How much I yearn to reach that Elysium, to cry out to her and put a stop to the memory of a woman on my rooftop. And the memory of a woman on my rooftop, and the idea of the Beatrix living on the roof, and also the star coming down. I think it's a great description up here. So there's some really good substance underneath the poem that could be teased out, but we just don't get enough clarity to engage with it. So yeah. And where does Wayne the Poet says, I call back to a very old style where classic understanding was important. Yeah. And then Emily Arnold Fernandez says, I think you're right. Maybe if I was fully current on all these illusions, I'd understand better. But for an American audience, such heavy use of classical references doesn't work. Yeah. I don't know if it's just American audiences. I think just that the way that we live now doesn't really lend itself to that. I mean, if you think you had, there were only so many stories to be told, and certain myths that lived that everybody learned, and there's just so much more. There's so much more stuff. There's so much more, around us now. I think it's hard for everybody to keep track of. They just don't play as an important state in our society. And by our society, I mean the entire sort of modern world. I don't think has, we have so much with the internet and with fluency so high and everybody reading everything, or literacy being so high, and so much media to consume, that having sort of central core stories that we all like touch back on and know what you're talking about doesn't really work as something. Like we have to talk more about direct experience, I guess. Let's see. Mary King says, Lady of Shalott had to look at reality through a mirror and couldn't look at it directly. Okay, that's cool. Yeah. Anyway, so there's some good kernels here, but let's get some story out and let us know more clearly what's going on in the poem so we can follow it. All right, let's go to the next poem. And next up, let's see. Once again, that was Aisha Rzan Baja. And let's go to the next poem. We have Crystal Carlberg from Massachusetts. Question, I'm thinking about embedded rhyme. Does it lend itself to musicality in these particular poems or distract? Is it too obvious, too subtle? So embedded rhyme. I wonder if that's internal rhyme is how I'd usually call that. Let's see what we've got. Are there two poems? Yeah, two poems here. They look pretty good quality. Let's see. Shelter. The underwater den, the hidden door, sapling snapped mid-growth, vines intertwined, chokecherry, reddest berries, volunteers with purple stalks. What kind of bird assembles in leaf and green, in grief and grieving? And what could he possibly teach me? Because italics means someone is talking, maybe to Jesus. Music is the best place to look for answers, like where to place an ampersand. The number of times I've been grateful for my glasses has doubled since we walked into the woods. I'd rather see an eagle or an angel than excuses, but I'm choosy. A box built for birds can house bats, for sure, because a circle has no bottom, no top, or rather, every exit is an entry until head is indistinguishable from wing or tapered tail feather. You say a fistful of fur can line a nest completely, but it's that kind of precision that scared me away when I used to think about having children in that abstract way that grass grows in one patch of dirt but not another. Is it rain? Delay of game? A reticence to play? I'm lightening, and I know it. I'm living proof. Laughter and the best laid plans can weave a roof, a refuge, a place to take a rest. Yeah. So as Emily Arnold Fernandez says, I like the internal rhymes and slant rhymes. Yeah, there's a nice audience to it. There's a nice musicality to it. I was reading that Winston Munn says about who's your audience. There's a nice musicality to the poem. It was fun to read. Yeah, Hammett Malk says love the sounds, and they're subtle. They're not like over the, they're not beating you over the head with it. It's a very casual, type of music in the poem, but I think it's nice. Yeah, Courtney says I love the grief leaf. Yeah, and when they're true rhymes that are embedded like that, they don't feel they don't like stand out as much and distract as much too. So the poems sound nice. It's the following the meaning of the poem though, I found myself drifting, and I don't know if everybody else had the same issue. I'm juggling a lot of things at once when I'm doing this, but there are certain parts I was engaged and my mind started to wander, and I think so. The question is like, why was it not gripping? There's this story that Alan always tells, and he told to me again because he's one of the people who tells the same story a lot. But when he was producing a movie, or he did a few movies in the 80s, and the producer or the director would have during the auditions, he'd be like reading a paper, reading magazines, not paying attention, talking to Alan, and finally at the lunchtime, Alan said, these kids are pouring their heart out. Why aren't you paying attention to them? And he said, it's their job to make me pay attention. And that's how poems are. Like when I'm reading submissions, I'm daydreaming and distracted and thinking about other stuff and reading. And then certain poems pull you in and they grab you. And then you realize that you're like on the edge of your seat reading this poem. And that's how you know it's a good poem. And so the key is to make the poems grab the reader's attention. In this, I like the music, but I wasn't really feeling like drawn into the poem as much. And so let's figure out why not, maybe. So Shelter is the title. The underwater den, the hidden door, sapling snapped mid-growth, vines entwined, chokecherry, reddest berries, volunteers with purple stalks. What kind of bird assembles in leaf and green and grief and grieving? See, that sounds very nice. What could he possibly teach me? Because italics means someone is talking, maybe Jesus, music. Music is the best place to look for answers, like where to place an ampersand. So I like the poem up to this part. And then I start to sort of daydream after this. I think we sort of stayed in the poem a little too long. Or in that sort of one place too long. I think we're ready for sort of something new to happen, maybe. The number of times I'd been grateful for my glasses has doubled since we walked into the woods. I'd rather see an eagle or an angel than excuses, but I'm choosy. A box built for birds can house bats, for sure, because a circle has no bottom, no top, or rather every exit is an entry until head is indistinguishable from wing or tapered tail feather. Sharon French says it needs the boom. Yeah, I think, I was absorbed in the poem. I think actually, even after the ampersand, I liked, I've been grateful for my glasses. The times I've been grateful for my glasses has doubled since we've walked into the woods. I like that too. And then it's more the next bit. I'd rather see an eagle or an angel than excuses, but I'm choosy. A box built for birds can house bats, for sure, because a circle has no bottom, no top, or rather every exit is an entry until head is indistinguishable from wing or tapered tail feather. So, I mean, that's just a long description to say that there are boxes that could have bats or birds in them, and I think, yeah. You say a full list of fur can line a nest completely, but it's that kind of precision that scared me away when I used to think about having children in that abstract way that grass grows in one patch of dirt but not another. So I'm back with the poem once we get to the personal of the sorry, where'd it go? I used to think about, so when you go back to the I used to think about, that pulls me back, and then the grass grows in one patch of dirt but not another is an interesting metaphor, and that pulls it back. Yeah. So it's like this section here that I feel like it's sort of just spinning its wheels and not going anywhere. As Deb T says, I like the detail about a fistful of fur lining a nest, but the problem is, so the details are nice too, still in this section, but they don't feel like they're adding to things, it's not progressing the poem. And at this point, I'm ready for the poem to progress, and I think that's what Sharon Fronte mentioned when she says it's missing the boom. So anyway, but then we get sort of back into the poem when we re-enter it as a human, the speaker. I used to think about having children in that abstract way that grass grows in one patch of dirt but not another. Is it rain, delay of game, a reticence to play? I'm lightning and I know it. That's an interesting line. I'm not sure what exactly it means, but it was interesting. I'm living proof. Laughter and the best laid plans can weave a roof, a refuge, a place to take rest. Yeah, and then we sort of get so it feels like these last two lines are kind of summarizing and trying to tie it together. But it feels to me sort of forced. And I think we sort of just drifted too long away from the. I like tangents in poems, but I think we drifted a little too far away from the central thing that we wanted to write about. But the poem is called Shelter. I think that's a nice title too. So the poem and the writing has a lot to go with it. Yeah, Jamie Thomas says some of these lines though are really, really terrific. Yeah, I agree. Deb says, but I'm looking for a stronger ending. PMB says lightning destroys shelter. Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to we sort of get the topic that we're contemplating, even as we talk about other things in this. I used to think about not having children in the abstract way grass grows, blah blah. Is it rain? I'm not sure what delay of game, a reticence to play, and then I'm lightning. I'm not sure what those exactly mean. And I think because I'm lightning and I know it, there's a confidence to that, and then there's an image quality to it with the actual being lightning. I think that's stronger than the delay of game and reticence to play. Yeah. Yeah, Rosenar says I don't understand the ampersand reference or the italics, but maybe I just need longer with the poem. Yeah, and I think, and Ali Rowland says too many ideas competing perhaps. And yeah, that's the thing. I think it feels kind of like we took a lot of tangents and it got kind of cluttered, and it lost my attention for a little bit because of that. And then it tries to like quickly wrap itself up at the end, but doesn't really get there. And so I think maybe talking more directly about what that delay of game and reticence to play really is, and maybe the issue is that we were sort of dancing around a topic, and then we got to it, but we didn't really want to talk about it directly. And maybe that's the thing, that we want to discuss that even more closely, like move to a new scene maybe there and talk about who were you thinking about having children with, and what was that choice like, and go to a different scene where you were thinking about that a lot, and then we can sort of feel connected on that, and then the rest can be a kind of frame or container for that discussion. Mary King says, is this a poem about someone wondering whether or not to have kids and afraid of how harsh life is? I'm not sure. Lynn Schilling says, could the poem end with, is it rain? I think that's a nice ending too. If we want to leave it ambiguous and sort of clean it out into a shorter poem, I think you could end with it, is it rain? I think that's a nice way to end. Chelsea McClellan says, I'm confused about the end. The best laid plans suggest to me failed plans, but then failed plans weaves the refuge? Yeah. Winston Munn says to me, there's no sense of completion to this poem. Yeah, it does. It feels like it drifts around a lot, then tries to tie itself together, but doesn't quite complete the knot, And so I think, but definitely the question up at the front was, does the music work? I think the music is great. And yeah. All right. And some great lines throughout too. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go to the next poem. And again, this, the author is, Crystal Carlberg from Massachusetts. Okay. This is Autumn. 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 Season of pumpkins and white spires. We keep dragging empty buckets to the summit in hopes of our cup will overflow. But the later it gets, the longer my shadow, the louder the voices. I'm banging some doors, a drum, this dumb thing abandoned in your closet. Sometimes I hate how honest we can be. It's a binge purge kind of feeling. Keep it in, release it. For years I kept a wooden spoon under my bed. I kept it fed, but now I keep it real. Once I referenced mustard and regretted all the knowledge I received. But there was no backtracking, no ladder or gavel that could rescue me. We have spent so much time trying to be beautiful, but everyone becomes unmentionable eventually. When I couldn't rescue you, I thought mostly about water and how it leaves through small spaces no one could conceive of. I have jumped from piers and rocks and boards not quite cemented into place. I have nearly drowned, but it was nothing like this sucker punch, this breathless sprint uphill. Miles and miles of leaves are falling, and I no longer understand our constant need to measure our desires when we could just stand still and breathe. And again, I think, I think in a similar way, there's some great individual lines, as Hammett said just now. But having it tie together in a way that adds to more than having great lines. It drifts a lot and then doesn't come to I know what it's really talking about, and it, yeah. So Autumn, maybe we should read it again. Yeah, Mary King says the poem is too vague. And I think in that case, instead of, maybe saying directly what it's about, instead of having Autumn be the title, helps with that. PMB says hiding truth behind metaphor. Yeah. And I think that so often in poems, even when we get great lines and good writing, we just have this reluctance to say directly what we're talking about, and to not know what we're talking about directly. We can't connect with a poem unless we know where to go. Well, if we want to become the speaker, we want to understand what's going on and what the context is, and then we can have that sort of magical transformation, that empathy machine that a poem is. We enter that poem by knowing the situation and then having the voice inhabit our bodies. And so needing to know the situation is a thing that we need to connect on that level. So, so working on letting the truth of what you're writing about come out, I think is the key. And you can do that. The title is Autumn, but we could change the title to something that reveals what we're really talking about, and that might help. Let's read the poem again, though. Autumn, season of pumpkins and white spires. We keep dragging empty buckets to the summit in hopes of our cup will overflow. And there are a few typos, it feels like, in this beginning. The of shouldn't be there. It should just be in hopes our cup will overflow. But the later it gets, the longer my shadow, the louder the voices. I'm banging some doors, a drum, this dumb thing abandoned in your closet. Maybe I just misread it last time, never mind. Sometimes I hate how honest we can be. Yeah, I think I just tripped over misreading a word or something. Anyway, let me read the poem from the top. Season of pumpkins and white spires, we keep dragging empty buckets to the summit in hopes of our cup will overflow. But the later is... Or maybe... Yeah, I guess it is wrong. But the later is gets the longer my... Later it gets. That's why. It's supposed to be it gets. All right. But the later it gets, the longer my shadow. The louder the voices. I'm banging some doors, a drum, this dumb thing abandoned in your closet. And I like the riff there. I like when there's a freedom to sort of leap and riff into new, surprising places. And so so I like the later it gets, the longer my shadow, the louder the voices. I'm not sure quite where that's going, but then I'm banging some doors, a drum, this dumb thing, and we get that great sound and the music going on too. This dumb thing abandoned in your closet. But who's the you? And I think in both poems we're swirling around who the you is and who we're talking about and what specifically we're talking about, and we get lost in that. Sometimes I hate how honest we can be. And so who's we again? It's a binge purge kind of feeling. Keep it in, release it. For years I kept a wooden spoon under my bed. And I think that's a really interesting detail, but I don't know what it means. And I think someone else mentioned that too. Mark Greener says this poem seems to have a center, the binge purge line, but most of it seems to avoid the hard stuff. Perhaps it's too hurtful. And yeah, I think I get the feeling of that too. Like we're afraid to actually address what we're writing about, so we're sort of couching it behind, as PMB said, behind the metaphor. And so we should get lost in them and just can't quite connect, even though it's an interesting experience because there's some really nice lines and good music to reading it. But anyway, for years I kept a wooden spoon under my bed. I kept it fed, but now I keep it real. Once I referenced mustard and regretted all the knowledge I received. Reference to who, and I don't know, it's just hard to follow. But there was no backtracking, no ladder or gavel that could recuse me. We have spent so much time trying to be beautiful, but everyone becomes unmentionable eventually. And so I think it's about an eating disorder, because I think the wooden spoon has to do with that. And then we have the binge purge. There's some other details, and then we spend so much time trying to be beautiful, and that's my guess, but I don't really know. But everyone becomes unmentionable eventually. When I couldn't rescue you, and again, rescue who from what? Like, we just don't really know. I thought mostly about water and how it leaves through small spaces no one could conceive of. And I think that's a great image, and it's really nice, really nicely wrought in the poem here, how it leaves through small spaces no one could conceive of. I have jumped from piers and rocks and boards, not quite cemented into place. I have nearly drowned, but it was nothing like this sucker punch. And what sucker punch? Like, we have all these things that come at us, but we don't know, like, where to put them or what they are. Yeah, this breathless sprint uphill. And what is the breathless sprint? We just keep saying, like, what is this? Like, where do I put this? It's like, we have the sign without the signified so much that it's hard to follow. Miles and miles of leaves are falling, and I no longer understand our constant need to measure our desires when we could just stand still and breathe. Yeah. Ali Rowan said there's so much here and so densely woven, but hard to keep up. But the couplets and the line breaks are nice. Yeah, I agree too. And also the music. Yeah, so all those aspects of the poem are really good. It's a nice poem to read. Watch the typos, that's all. But other than that, it's a really nice poem to read. There's a great music to it. But it's hard to, and with a... so Wayne says you is the poet talking to the reflection of him or herself. Yeah. And it could be. I think it's too ambiguous to know. Like, when we have to guess at all this stuff, it just makes it not only less pleasurable, but we just can't connect with it. And so PMB says, wow, the thing about an eating disorder is so perceptive. I'm terrible at digging things out like that. I'm not sure, though. I mean, that's like my guess, and we don't want to have to guess. So Hemant Malik says, if so, the title at bulimia, maybe something interesting like, the second autumn after bulimia or something, like somehow add to it. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So just let us in. if you're going to write poems for public consumption, there's two modes of writing, really. There's public and private poetry. There's a kind of journaling where you're speaking to yourself and letting your own revelations come out, and it's only for you, and there's no real need to share it. And if you're doing that, fine, just like keep doing it. But to be writing for publishing, you got, if you're going to put yourself out there and talk about these topics that are really personal and hard to talk about, you still have to let us in and let us know exactly what you're talking about so we can feel and connect and learn from it too, because we're trying to learn from your experience and have a more depth to our understanding and emotional abilities to connect with other people in life and understand what it means to be on this earth. In doing that, we have to know what you're actually talking about. I think both of these poems show that. There's great technical skill in the poems, but they're not letting us into the poems. So let us in. Let us know what you're talking about if you want to share them. All right. But thanks for sharing them here because they're really fun to talk about. Okay. We'll look at another one. We'll do one more, and that'll be it for today because it's past the hour. Once again, that was Crystal Carlberg. Just label it so that I can let Crystal know. And I email everybody the next day so that the comments come back because the comments disappear for about 12 hours or so. Okay, next is Lex Page. And no general questions, but two shortish poems. Weighing the poets is an important thing. Many poets do the clarifying when they read publicly. And that's true too. And I think that's why I really recommend if you're going to read poems in public, it's also harder to pick up on things when you're just hearing and you're not looking at a poem too. And so when you're giving a reading, I recommend giving that kind of context and backstory because then the people will connect with it more. I think half of the reading should just be talking on a personal level. And then you also get a break from the intensity of the poetry. And so I think at readings, it's really great to have that sort of setup. And if you just read through poems, they're just not as profound or powerful a reading. So so that's great, and it's true. Like if the poet here was reading that poem in an event, she could say this is what it's about, and then it would know what it's about, and then the poem could be what it is. And I think that's kind of the work that a title can do. If we don't have that opportunity, because you're trying to publish it in a magazine or a book, we don't have that opportunity to have the backstory. But if you put it in the title or an epigraph or like right at the beginning of the first stanza, then we get to know what you would tell us at a reading, and then we get to feel and experience it too. Yeah. Okay, so one more. We do these two last poems. And again, the poet was Lex Page from Wisconsin. And there's two short poems. Well, the second poem's sort of average length. The first one's a little bit short, sonnet sort of size. This is Rib. A wound cups the breast where a rib should be. Dripping blood and pus into the ovarian vessels, you drain twice a day, bent over the sink as if in prayer, taking note of the way your swift healing body transmutes blood into water, milliliter by milliliter. At night, you sleep cradling the wound with your hand. Dreaming, you dip your fingers into its openness and find something crowning at the edges. You did not go under the knife for tumors, but tumors they found, twin foreign bodies nested within your breasts. You received the proof of their existence in an email and christened the right breast Tumor Eve. Of the other one, the biopsy report reads, no distinct lesions are seen. Yeah. So I think the poem, starts out pretty well. I think, Rib is a title. I think the title can do more work. We've been talking about titles all day, so just what we've been talking about before will apply here. We could do more with that title than just rib, which is kind of a label. But a wound cups the breast where a rib should be. There's a nice rhythm to that. There's a nice entry, so we sort of get to see what's going on. Dripping blood and pus into the ovarian vessels, you drain twice a day. The blood and pus, I don't know, it's one of those unfortunate things, but there's so much sort of melodramatic, amateur type poetry that has blood and pus all over it that, the poems feel weaker just by having word blood in it. As a submission, if I see the word blood, I kind of like, ugh, and I'm not looking forward to reading it. And it's a tough thing to get around. And I'm trying to think if there's a good example of a poem that gets around that problem. And I really don't know. But anyway, you kind of need it here. And I think So when I get to the dripping blood and pus, I'm kind of like, oh gosh, I don't, another of these crappy poems. But then it sort of becomes a lot more visceral, and I think it expands in a way that becomes unique and interesting. So I think it works. It's just sort of a tough moment in the poem. Into the ovarian vessels you drain twice a day, bent over the sink as if in prayer, taking note of the way your swift healing body transmutes blood into water, milliliter by milliliter. Yeah. Elizabeth Brown points out, not sure what dripping blood into the ovarian vessels mean. Vessels shaped like ovaries. Yeah, I was wondering about that too, and I forgot to mention. So thanks. I'm not sure what the ovarian, the anatomy of that. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. As Emily Arnold Fernandez says, I mean, the two are sort of nowhere around each other. Are they shaped like ovaries somehow? Yeah. Yeah, so Dick Westheimer, this is a good example. Dick Westheimer says, how about dripping sewage and rust? Yeah, if you can talk about the blood and the pus as something different, and I think that's a great example of how to do that, then that's a great example of how you would do it. So Nancy Sabanek says a Jackson Pratt drain bulb looks like an egg shape. I think maybe it's like sort of almost a mixed metaphor type problem. If the vessel is a bulb, a Jackson Pratt drain bulb, and it's an ovarian shape, having two biological parts but are both describing like a physical object, and then the parts are in different places that don't really fit, like what an ovarian vessel would be. I think that maybe is the problem with that line. And maybe so if it's a bulb like that, then describe it like that. Don't call it a vessel. Like call it a bulb. Even though vessel might fit the music a little better, find a better way to say it, because I think it's a little confusing. Yeah. Anyway, you drain twice a day, but there's a great rhythm and an intensity to the poem too. There's a power to it that's really nice. Bent over the sink as if in prayer, taking note of the way your swift healing body transmutes blood into water, milliliter by milliliter. At night you sleep, cradling the wound with your hand, dreaming. You dip your fingers into its openness and find something crowning at the edges. And yeah, that's I think that's really the strongest part of the poem right there, that dream of dipping your hand in there into its openness and finding something crowning at the edges. Just how vivid and how sort of unforgettable that image is. I think that works really well. I mean, it's a powerful poem with a lot of strength in it, and that's like the peak of it, I think. You did not go under the knife for tumors, but tumors they found. I think the tumors they found is a little bit stilted in a way that it doesn't fit with this poem. So I may just change the syntax of that. Twin foreign bodies nested within your breasts. You received the proof of their existence in an email and christened the right breast tumor Eve. Of the other one, the biopsy report reads, no distinct lesions are seen. And yeah, somebody said, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said that the lack of reassurance and the no distinct lesions as opposed to just no lesions is a powerful sort of subtle ending too. It's understated in a way that's nice. But I think we lose a little bit of the intensity and the sort of the power of the rhythm in that section toward the end. And I think maybe it's but tumors they found. That shift in register kind of took the voice and the energy out of the poem a little bit. You did not go into the knife for tumors, but tumors they found. Twin foreign bodies nested within your breast. And we've talked about breasts a bunch already, so having that come back up in that same way, I think we want a different description there too. Nested within something else, something a little more vivid, so we can sort of re-establish that sort of concrete, visceral nature of the poem there. You received the proof of their existence in an email and christened the right breast tumor Eve. Yeah, I think Emily Arnold Fernandez paraphrased this really well, as she often does. This poem grabs me by the gut, powerful and imageful. A few places it can be stronger, but a lot of really good stuff here. Yeah, I think that's in general what it is. I think I love the ending. I think the only thing I would play with this section it just doesn't have the same strength as the rest of the poem. I think you'd play with that. And then the ovarian vessels, I think there's a better way to describe that doesn't lead us down some roads that are confusing. The other thing, thanks for bringing this up. So Liz Brown says Tomb or Eve is in Christmas Eve or Adam and Eve. Yeah, and that's the thing too. Eve, I'm not sure where to put that. And, just it says, is it the eve of a day, or is it Eve capital, like Adam and Eve, like it was the first tumor that birthed the rest? So that was a little confusing. And it feels like one of those, it's very late to add a reference that doesn't have any other, I guess the rib is there, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe Eve should be capitalized, and the rib has to do with the Adam and Eve rib story, from Genesis. So maybe that's it, but that's not really, as Hammett Malik says, Eve from his rib. But that seems like sort of a quick sort of tangent that's like, that isn't really developed. And so maybe we need a little bit more development of that concept if we want to. But I think the straightforward power of the poem is what's really working. Like there's an energy and an intensity to the story that's being told in this little nugget. And that no distinct lesions are seen is so sort of ambiguous and frightening, And I think that's a great way to end the poem in an understated way. So I think I like the poem as it is. Rosenauer points out no capitals anywhere else in the poem. Yeah, good point. And that's why a lot of times you'll see people who don't use capitals mostly in the poems will still capitalize proper nouns because it gets confusing without it. And so maybe that's part of it. Yeah. So I do think that Adam and Eve thing can be developed a little more, because I'm not sure, and that can be just a little phrase or a line. And there's some, we have the crowning within the dream of the sort of tumor in the wound, and there's a little bit of I think we could have like one little phrase to make it connect a little bit more. Yeah. Okay. Let's take a look at the other poem. That was Rib again, and the other poem is a little longer slightly, but not really because it's skinny lines. Let's see. Bionic autopsy. 1. Coroner. It was born a broken body, born twisted for metal, bent limbs, begging order under the knife, begging to be split open, split-minded, stitched together, owing life to human hands. We conclude it was never born at all. 2. Corpse. Stop. I am still breathing. You are dissecting iron lungs, exhumed from a coffin within my chest, half blood, half oil, half animal, half robot, wholly feeling and awake. I reject every flesh organ transplanted within me, but this ticking time bomb heart I call my own, accepting the likely event of human error, a wire snipped wrong or too close, then explosive oblivion, the rebellion of matter compressed to the point of undoing, too vast to contain the self. I am large, I contain everything. Your verdict destroys me, doctor. I reject the diagnosis. I am still born every day. Yeah. So, I don't know. Again, I think there's really nice music and a powerful rhythm to the poem, especially at the first half of it. And I think that's the real strength of this writer, is to have that, musical, emotional energy be pouring forth. And there's a natural rhythm to it that works really well. Bionic biopsy. It was born a broken body, twisted for metal, bent limbs, begging order under the knife, begging to be split open, split-minded, stitched together, owing life to human hands. We conclude it was never born at all. Yeah, so I like that. Yeah, I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure exactly what's going on in the poem. I think maybe, just again, like we've been seeing all day, it's just letting us in more is really important. I like the language, but I'm still spending too much time. And you can see the comments. Wayne the Poet says, is this sci-fi poetry? Is this a robot? Says Mary Keating. Divine Starling said, ouch, the corpse talking packs a punch. Yeah. Yeah, Emily Arnold Fernandez says, I wonder if it was about a robot or about a body with a pacemaker. So we're sort of speculating about what the poem's about. And I think you see that so much, and that's not the kind of speculation we want. We want to know what the poem is about on a tangible level, so then we can engage and find it gripping and think about the world and our emotions in a more complicated way. So you take something that's like there on the surface, and then complicate the world after that. But you need that to know what's like physically at the moment about in order to do that. Sidney Gunderman says, I don't get this one at all, but it is interesting. Anyway, so I reread the first section, coroner. Then 2 is corpse. Stop, I am still breathing. You are dissecting iron lungs exhumed from a coffin within my chest. So, who is the you? Who am I? It's so hard to follow because we don't know that. If we knew who was talking, we got a sense of that, then we could connect with the poem more. And, are like iron lungs, like, is that because it's a robot, or iron lungs that, the iron lungs from polio treatment? I'm just not sure. Exhumed from a coffin within my chest. And the coffin's within my chest. Half blood, half oil, half animal, half robot. Wholly feeling and awake, I reject every flesh organ transplanted within me. Maybe it is just a science fiction poem. Yeah, it's Jerry Steffensen records a great amount of guesswork, and we just shouldn't be left there. Like, you're asking us to care about what you're writing about when you're writing a poem. And the language can make us care a little bit. Like, the initial thing we care about is getting a sense of like a voice speaking to us in a way that's compelling. But then we have to care too about what's going on in the poem. And if it requires a great amount of guesswork, which happens just so often, then we just can't, it doesn't feel like it was worth our time if we don't know what we just read. And I get that's the feeling I get here, where I don't know, I just don't know what's going on. And the title, bionic autopsy, like that could reveal what we're talking about in a way that we feel more connected. Sharon French says Borg, I just have no idea. And I think that just leaves us sort of hanging and wishing we knew, but that's not enough. Like, wishing that we knew just isn't the way that you should leave a reader with when you're writing anything, really, because then, we won't want to read it again. Wholly feeling and awake, I reject every flesh organ transplanted within me, but this ticking time bomb heart I call my own, accepting the likely event of human error, a wire snipped wrong or too close, then explosive oblivion, the rebellion of matter compressed to the point of undoing, too vast to contain the self, I am large, I contain everything, the Whitman reference. Your verdict destroys me, doctor. So all of a sudden we know at the very end we're talking to a doctor. And the coroner, I guess, the coroner said that, that the whatever we're talking about was dead, and the corpse is saying no, and that I reject your verdict, or I reject the diagnosis, I am stillborn every day. Chelsea McClellan says, I'm reading as the person's body rejects transplants, but the artificial heart works, so the person feels bionic. But it could be clear with an explicit title. Yeah, that's possible too. Wayne the Poet says, and this is a really great important question, if it is sci-fi and we accept that, is the poem interesting? And I don't know, it's a good question. The poem has to be a good poem, really. And I don't know, but it's hard to even answer that question because I'm not sure if that actually is what it's about, or is it what Chelsea's saying? It was so ambiguous that I don't even know. And I think I don't know. Yeah. Hammett Malik said I read it as the spirit still clinging to the body. And so that's just all the different sort of interpretations just go to show how much the poem, because it's not clear, it's lacking that sort of general basic clarity, just sort of leaves us spinning and hanging. And I think there's a real, and I'm not saying this poet does that. Poet against his Lex Page. I'm not saying that's what Lex Page is doing, but there is a tendency for people to sort of, revel in that. And say, like, I know what it's about, and the fact that you're reading this and you don't know, there's a sense of like, I'm, feeling superior, because I'm the one who knows. Like, I have the inside information, and I'm revealing it or withholding it and not revealing it to you. And I think there's a tendency that people have to do that, And I just think it's not something that a successful writer does. If you're successful in having your writing be memorable and transformative for people, you have to let them know what you're writing about and like what is actually going on. And I think, withholding that is something that we should avoid doing. Yeah. Yeah. And Chelsea McClellan says, interesting dialogue between the coroner and the corpse, though. I want to see this poem again after adding clarity. Yeah, it's just some great lines. Yeah. Is there, let's see. Oh, I had it on Top Chat instead of live chat. So I missed some comments, actually. I wonder how long it's been set to that. So Doug Van Houser said, well, where'd it go? I don't know. Doug Van Houser said, what is the purpose of the enlarged spaces? And how I read those, yeah, that's what I was looking for. How I interpret those, and you see this as a style of poetry people do sometimes, is to give you sort of a mental and breath break. When you have, it's like a mini line break, even less significant than a line break is, and you shouldn't really pause too much on a line break. You should but it gives you a chance to pause if it's like appropriate within the syntax, and it lets you clump sort of concepts together too. And so when I read it, I wouldn't say it was born a broken body, born twisted for metal, bent limbs, begging, order, under the knife, begging to be split open. But even though you don't read it like that, you still get the tiny gap, which allows you a little bit of space, a little bit of breathing room, and a little bit, you can take a breath there if you want. So it like sort of aids in this kind of, higher pace type poem, to have a sort of freewheeling, like you don't really know where you're going sense, which is what people, I think we've seen a bunch of poems already, or today that have no punctuation. And a lot of times you want it to have that free sense, and that's why you're sort of compelled to do it. And having spaces makes it easier to read because you have those sort of opportunities to pause and slow down, even though it's really subtle. It's like a little brief, slight breath or mental reset, and you can sort of move through the poem without sort of not having a full stop, but then not really running out of breath and being able to follow the pace there. So that's how I interpret those, and I think that's mostly what people are doing with it. I think if you start reading it like they're big pauses or something, it ends up being really stilted and doesn't work. And so I think that's the only interpretation that's successful. So that's what I assume people want to do. That's my interpretation of it. Yeah. And Rosenar says, when I use them, there are pauses. Yeah, but I think emphasizing that they're really, really brief pauses that are almost, almost not there, but there slightly. It sort of slows down the pace a little bit without really stopping it. PMB says it's great for people like me who don't know how to punctuate. Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, so that's going to wrap it up. Thanks for sharing this and everybody who shared poems today. Yeah. And so that was 2 poems by Lex Page. Thanks for sharing those, Lex. We had a whole bunch of interesting poems this week, which is always fun. And that is the wrap up the show for today. Now, let's see. This week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be... that's wrong. Not Donald. That was last week's guest. So we missed Donald. He was great. Donald is just a wonderful poet and really, really fun human. So go check that out if you didn't. That was last week's guest, Donald Platt. His most recent book was Swans Down. Now, the next week's guest coming up on Sunday is Denise Duhamel. And of course, she was last year's Rattle, one of 3 Chapbook Prize winners last year for her book In Which is a lighter, sort of fun, peppy version of Imagined Selves. We're exploring here in this book In Which that was one of 3 Chapbook Prize winners. We already saw Sky Mall come out, and then we have a book of haiku coming up by Kat Lehman in the spring. This is the sandwiched in between In Which by Denise Duhamel. She's also got a new book out from Pitt Press this week called Pink Lady, about her mother who worked as a nurse and dying during COVID and the difficulties that brought. So sort of a memoir about her mother. And Pink Lady will be reading poems from that too, as well as from In Which. That's Denise Duhamel. The prompt for this week was to, let's see, let me look it up. It was to use a word from your child that reminds you of childhood. Let me get the exact phrasing, though. Yeah, it was think of a word that transports you back to childhood and give the poem that title. So one word title, and that word is a word that transports you back to childhood. That's your prompt for this week. Denise Duhamel is the guest. We'll talk about In Which and Pink Lady. It's at Sunday, January 19th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.